Hello, friends. Good to see you again. I hope you are doing well. Today, I have a bit of a bumper stream for you. We're going to be bringing lots of different ideas, disciplines, aspects together to do an analysis of a topic which I've wanted to do for a while. It's something for several months I've been playing over in my mind how to approach it. There's so many different angles and aspects to it and ways into it because it's something which I think is fundamental to who we are as human beings. I think particularly Western human beings, as we'll get into, but it's something that we as a people wrestle with. It's our attitude to the world. It's how we engage with the things around us, indeed with ourselves. And it's something which is very central to Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle, and to some extent J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, and that is the aesthetic attitude. Now, this just to clarify, because I think it's important to clarify before we get into things, that I'm using this term in the way that was intended by Kant or Schopenhauer, which means it's a way of viewing the world which is related to how we view art. So this stream isn't really about Wagner's artistic approach, for example. That's not what this is about. If you want that, you can check out my streams on Wagner Day. Rather, this is a connected idea about how we as the viewer, or we as those sitting in the audience of a Wagner opera, should be engaging with it. And indeed, once we leave the Wagner opera, how we should be engaging with ordinary life. And so I think maybe perhaps the best way to get into this subject is by going through a synopsis of the first of Wagner's Ring Cycle, the first opera within it, Das Rheingold, because there's certain beats or aspects of that particular opera which help us to draw out the fundamental conflict which Wagner wants to get at. So the opera opens with this lovely E chord, which is the shimmering waters of the Rhine. And we are first met with these three beautiful Rhine maidens, these beautiful nymph-like creatures frolicking in the waters. Everything is in a state of peace, utopia, you might say. It's almost a kind of Garden of Eden sort of situation. But even in the garden, there was a serpent, and not too long we meet an ugly, stunted creature rising from the depths. This is Alberich, the primary antagonist of the whole Ring Cycle. He sees the three Rhine maidens and is overcome with desire. He wants to have one for himself. And so he tries to get them. He tries to reach out and approach them and see if any of them will make love with him. The Rhine maidens, though they are beautiful, they are not necessarily good. And they decide to tease Alberich and make fun of him. So, one by one, they each entertain his courtship. And in rather sarcastic ways, they lead him on. They make him think that he has a chance with them. But as each courtship progresses, eventually they reveal to him that they had no interest in him, that he is an ugly, lower being who has, it's absolutely absurd that he could get with a Rhine maiden. You may have seen the cover image for this stream. Let me see if I can find a version of it by Arthur Rackham, who illustrated a lot of the Wagner's Ring Cycle. Let's see. We'll be able to. How did I find it? Rhine maidens, because it's a very good illustration of the juxtaposition between these creatures and why they would have such a reaction to Alberich's advances. Here it is. So if I share screen, here we go. So you can see Alberich is this he's a monster, really. He's like a goblin or a troll, and these are elfin-like beings. He they just don't seem compatible in any way, shape, or form. So Alberich is thrown into a rage, and he bursts out that in lust he's going to capture one for himself and, effectively rape her. The Rhine maidens, though, are too quick for him and keep darting about, making fun of him, and he is unable to catch them. But then a ray of sunshine hits the riverbed of the Rhine, and it lights up in golden shimmers. This is because it has hit the Rhine gold, this most precious, beautiful substance, which the Rhine maidens have been ordered to guard by their mother. And the Rhine maidens are overcome with joy. Their attention on Alberich is totally gone because before them is this beautiful object. And I think it might be worth reading their initial response to seeing the Rheingold lighting up the River Rhine. Uh, and in the music that you have to imagine, I can't sing it. In the music, there is this amazing, triumphal, glorious sound being made by these Rhine maidens. Rheingold, Rheingold, light bringing joy, how bright and sublime your laughter! A glowing gleam breaks awesomely forth from the gold in the seething waves. Awaken, friend, awake to joy. Gladdening games will play for you now. When the river glows and the flood is aflame, your bed we encircle, diving and dancing and singing, blithely blissful abandon. Rheingold, Rheingold, ha ha ha! So the Rhine maidens are moved to praise. They are overjoyed by the sight of the Rheingold, and they invite Alberich into their appreciation for this treasure. But Alberich, this dwarf, he is not interested in praising the Rheingold. The first thing he essentially says to them is, "I do not care for it unless it is useful for me. What use is this Rheingold to me?" The Rhine maidens then explain to Alberich how it may be useful. They say to him that the Rheingold can be taken by whoever renounces love and forged into a ring which will give him the power over the world, the most powerful ring in the world, and it will also help him to create great treasure. But they are not worried that Alberich will act upon this because, in their view, no creature will renounce love. Love is the fundamental relationship between all creatures, or at least between creatures. The animals, they couple and mate together, and then they have their offspring and they have their family and so on. And this is the fundamental urge within all beings, that we want to find that union or communion with another and bring forth new life. So they're not worried about Alberich. Indeed, they believe that he's just been chasing them in pursuit of love. So they're quite happy to tell him this. But Alberich, he is deeply wounded by what's happened, by the way that they scorned him. And he does not believe that he can get love anymore. Thus, he renounces it, takes the Rheingold from the river, and forges himself the ring of power. So in this opening scene, we already have hints of this idea of the aesthetic attitude and its opposite. But before we kind of explain that more fully, we can see it work through the rest of the opera. Let me stop showing this. So we move forward and we find Wotan. Wotan, who is king of the gods, celebrating that Valhalla, the fortress of Valhalla, has been built, and it is going to be his secure fortress as he rules over the world. But there is a cost, because Wotan ordered the giants to build this for him. And now that they have completed the building of this work, they have come for payment. And the payment that Wotan offered them was the goddess Freya. Well, Freya, the most beautiful of the gods, she has these golden apples that she gives to the gods, which maintains their eternal youth. And when the giants come for their payment, Wotan is initially reluctant because of this very fact. The other gods are also terrified that if she goes, they're going to lose their immortality. Nonetheless, Wotan is ruler of the world because of his treaties, because of his contracts, which are inscribed upon his spear. This is the basis of his rule. And if he breaks his contract with the giants, he undermines the foundation for why he is in that position. It becomes then a battle of force, and the giants will wage war against him. So to maintain his power, he must trade Freya. But this is a disaster, and almost immediately the gods start to wither. And so, with the help of Logi, who is his kind of assistant on his shoulder, Wotan must find another treasure which is of comparable value to Freya that the giants will accept. And they have heard of Alberich forging this ring. And so they decide to descend down into the Nibelheim, where the Nibelungs, the Dark Elves or Dwarves, live. And they find Alberich, and he's been a busy, busy boy. In the time that he has forged the ring, he has enslaved the Nibelungs. Before, they were a happy race, making treasures to give to their wives as tokens of their love. But by his power, he has managed to force them to create and dig for treasure and pile it up for him, building himself a great store of wealth. And with this dark force, he will seek to overthrow the gods, bring them down to his level, make them renounce love, and bring all the world into his state of misery. Through some trickery and deception, Wotan and Logi are able to kidnap Alberich in a moment of exploiting his vanity and pride. And by force, they are able to take the ring from him. Then the giants return, and Wotan is conflicted. He wishes to save Freya, at least because it's in the interest of the gods. But the ring has an allure to it. This is because when Alberich lost it, he cursed it. He said all men will desire it, that they will be tormented when they have it. They will not find peace, and it will be their bane. So Wotan is consumed with desire for this ring because he desires power, and this will give him all power over the world. But eventually, due to various prophecies that are told and so on, Wotan is able to hand over the ring in exchange for Freya. And the opera ends with Wotan and the gods entering Valhalla, seemingly triumphant, having resolved the situation, but with a note of tension, because the ring is now with the giants. It is outside of their control. There are forces such as Alberich seeking to reclaim this ring. And there is a sense in which the doom of the gods has already been confirmed by the events of Das Rheingold. So this brief summary, I think it will help us to draw out the kind of key ideas here. When we look at Alberich at the very beginning, his fundamental attitude towards everything within the prologue is one of utility. When he sees the Rhine maidens, he talks about loving them, but he does not love any particular one. If he did, he wouldn't immediately move on to the next one in pursuit of sex, right? He doesn't actually love them as individuals. What he really wants is sexual pleasure, which the Rhine maidens can give him. And this is confirmed by his own words when, in a rage, he says, you will satisfy my burning passion. I will make you. This attitude then is translated across to the Rheingold. He does not have any interest in it as a being in its own right, for its beauty or its splendor. He just wants to know how he can exploit it for his own benefit. And then we see this carried through with how he treats his fellow Nibelungs. He turns them into extensions of his will, means by which he can achieve great wealth and further power. But he is not the only one who is engaged in such an attitude. Wotan has the same attitude, primarily towards Freya. He sees the goddess, who is one of his own kind, is probably a relative of his, as nothing more than something to be bargained for, that she can be traded for the building of Valhalla. And he only wants her return, not because he values her as an individual, as a being, but because of the benefit that she accrues to the gods, namely that she gives them immortality. If she didn't offer that to them, if she didn't give them that treasure or that higher good, that the thing they value more than her, then would they have traded the ring for her? I doubt it. So there is this very transactional, utility driven approach by both Alberich and Wotan. This is something we'll return to later. But what Wagner's getting at is this exploitation, or this exploitative attitude, is, in his view, that which sets the world wrong. Because remember, the initial opening of Das Rheingold is the state of nature, one of harmony, one of where things are in proper relation to each other. The world is organized according to love. Whereas this desire for power, or this seeing things only insofar as how they can benefit me, is that which disrupts it, because then we take things out of their proper usage or their proper place and turn them into something less. We see this idea in Tolkien, and we'll have to kind of tease this out. It's not going to be immediately obvious the whole way it's in Tolkien, but it will come through. Look at a character like Sauron, the primary antagonist of the Lord of the Rings. His desire is to conquer the whole of Middle-earth. And more than that, it's to either enslave all of its inhabitants or destroy those who cannot be enslaved. The enslavement of these beings is essentially a way of turning them into means by which his will can be done, or his will can be affected upon the world more immediately through them. And this can be seen in the Ringwraiths, for example. They were once great kings, wizards, scholars, and so on, who accepted from Sauron rings of power. These rings gave them great knowledge and strength and the ability to govern and find new secrets. But in time, they became ensnared by his will and essentially puppets of what he desired. If he wanted them to go and conquer this nation, they had to go and do it. Through them, he was acting. But this is an unnatural state. They are not part of Sauron. They are beings independent from him. They are other from him. And so this has a detrimental effect upon them. They become less than they were. They pass from the world of the living into this kind of state between living and death. They are undead. They are in the shadow realm. They have no visible form. That's why they have these black cloaks, so that they can be seen. They literally pass out of being, in a sense. And that's because their natural independence and will, their integrity, has been crushed by being made essentially a limb of another creature. The same is true of the orcs. There's a bit of misunderstanding about how far the orcs were independent beings and so on. If you're interested in kind of the deeper lore of Middle-earth, I would definitely recommend getting your hands on this book, Morgoth's Ring. It's been put together by Christopher Tolkien, and it includes a series of unpublished stories and essays by Tolkien, where he goes into a lot of the metaphysical dynamics of Middle-earth. And in one of these, or in a few of these essays, or short kind of extracts, he talks about the orcs and their relations to first Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, and then to Sauron. And he makes the point that orcs are independent beings, that they have their own ability to make decisions. They, once the Dark Lords are defeated, the orcs can still exist and act in their own interests, primarily through hatred towards elves and so on. But they are, when the Dark Lords are in power, so when Sauron is amassing his army, he uses his mighty powers to essentially make the orcs, or many of the orcs, somewhat like puppets, that they are acting in accordance with his designs in a very direct way. So it's not just that he sent out a list of commands that they have to follow of their own volition. It's that their wills are being directed like a puppet on a string. And so you see this particularly at the Battle of the Black Gate. When Frodo puts the ring on his finger in Mount Doom, Sauron is immediately alerted to the peril that he's in, that the ring is at the one place where it could be destroyed, and that he doesn't have any way of stopping that at that moment. It's out of his hands. His whole attention moves away from the battle in front of his country, on the borders of where he is, to Mount Doom. And at that moment, all the orcs and trolls who are fighting in that battle, they feel this sudden loss of their master's will, and they are shaken to the core. The film does a good job of this. You see one of the trolls running away when this happens, and it's or even more so when Sauron dies, the orcs just run away. They're not going to stay and fight. They're very much being directed by the will of Sauron in a very immediate way. So they are, how would you put it? These are examples then, or taking to the extreme, Alberich's attitude. Because Sauron does not respect the independence or the otherness of these beings, or of any being. He wants to make them all extensions of his will. This perhaps has its most... Tolkien takes this to its most extreme in the character of Morgoth, at least in some of the side materials that he wrote. I'm not sure if you read the Silmarillion, you would come up with this idea, but in some of his essays, Tolkien makes a suggestion that Morgoth, he hated the existence of anything other than himself or that which he had created. And so he sought the absolute destruction of all things that were not himself. But more than that, he sought to infuse himself with the material world. This is why the book is called Morgoth's Ring, because just as Sauron poured his cruelty and malice and will to dominate all life into the One Ring, so Morgoth poured his will to dominate into the whole of the material order. And so, in a sense, the material world of Middle-earth is Morgoth's ring. This has some very interesting implications from a lore point of view. But the key idea here is that Morgoth wants the whole of reality to consist in himself, and everything to be a means by which he more immediately executes his will. So he doesn't want matter to have independence from himself. He wants to be the thing which directs it. He just wants to think his thought and it come into reality, and for there to be no being other than himself capable of doing so. This sort of attitude is what we might call primary narcissism, or a form of primary narcissism. This is a phrase which comes from Sigmund Freud, but it's a concept which has been developed in the field of psychoanalysis in different ways. But there's a general agreement, I think, that when infants first enter the world, they don't have a clear sense of the ego at that point. They do not have a fully developed concept of the self. And that's because they cannot distinguish between the self and the other. They see all of the reality as an extension of their own being. But even that isn't quite right. It's because they wouldn't, I think they don't even necessarily recognize their own being in a sense. There's just everything is centered around their desires and wishes and so on. And so they desire food and it is delivered to them, right? They need a cuddle and it's delivered to them. They do not necessarily understand, or they don't make the connection that the thing which supplies that isn't themselves. They just have the desire and it is fulfilled. So there's that kind of connection being made there. It's been postulated that what helps to create a sense of self is actually suffering, because when the infant first does not have their desire fulfilled, when the parent fails to do so for whatever reason, they then become aware that there is something other than themselves, because their desire is not immediately fulfilled. It was dependent on something that wasn't just in themselves. And so that is the first step away from a narcissistic, solipsistic worldview. But somebody like Morgoth, he wants a return to that situation where he desires something and it becomes true, because he wants all of reality just to consist in himself. Now, that might seem like a large step away from just seeing everything from the point of view of its utility, how it benefits me, how it relates to me. But that is the logical endpoint if we had that kind of power. And it is the temptation which Wagner and Tolkien are pointing to when we treat the world around us, the things around us, purely in how they serve ourselves. We may not have the power to do that, but for many of us, at least that's what they're suggesting, for many of us, it's how we see the world, as an extension of ourselves, at least in a kind of de facto way. I think it will be worth then pointing out the other side then. So what is the better way to view the world in their point of view? And this takes us to the aesthetic attitude. Now, as I've said already, this is a concept which was developed by Immanuel Kant, and a figure like Arthur Schopenhauer, who was an influence on Wagner, really work through as well. And we'll use Schopenhauer's kind of understanding of it as a gateway into the discussion. So for Schopenhauer, he had the idea that all of us are driven by a will to life, that all we are, indeed the whole of reality, is at a fundamental level this kind of series of conflicts between beings with a will to life. That's not quite accurate, but I think it's a good way to put it. We want to thrive. We want to have our growth. We want to reproduce. We want to survive. And we will do what we can to make these things happen. We will use things for that purpose. We will diminish others. We will use others. We will destroy others to ensure our own survival, to ensure that we reproduce, and so on. This is what dominates our lives for Schopenhauer. And it is the cause of much suffering, because we often desire things, but we often fail to achieve those desires, and thus we suffer. We are in pain because of that. But there is a state of mind or relationship to the world which does not involve suffering. And that can be primarily seen with art. With a work of art, say a painting, when we approach it, if we're doing so with the right attitude for Schopenhauer, we're not engaging with it in terms of its utility or its purpose or its benefit to me. Indeed, it doesn't seem to have any particular immediate advantage when we engage with the work of art for my survival or something like that. Rather, we are engaging with it outside of the realm of desire or beyond the realm of desire. And this allows us to engage with it in a way which is not neutral, but we might say disinterested. We can appreciate it on its own terms. We can see it as an end in itself, that this is something that isn't involved or defined by me and my quest for survival. And so I can appreciate it both its good sides, its bad sides, the sides that benefit me, the sides that don't benefit me. I can take it all in. I can see it in, I hesitate to use the word objective because I don't think that's quite right. I can see its value in a way which is I can appreciate it on its own terms. And this is how the Rhine maidens engage with the Rhine gold. If you remember back, when they see the sun's rays lighting it up, they don't immediately think, okay, how can I use this? How does this benefit me? How does this help me execute my will? No, they just start celebrating and praising. They enjoy the Rhine gold for its own sake. There is no ulterior motive to their joy. And indeed, they see that this kind of reaction suggests that they value it so highly that rather than pursuing their own desires, they see the elevation or celebration of this treasure as an end in itself, as something worth doing for its own sake. The same idea is in The Lord of the Rings in a somewhat interesting way. and it comes through the character of Tom Bombadil. He is in many ways a kind of microcosm of many of Tolkien's values. Many of the key themes and ideas of the story are found and introduced in Tom, and so while they may not be so explicit later on, we have a kind of lens to see the rest of the tale with Tom Bombadil. And I wanted to just read you a little bit from The Lord of the Rings, because I think it will help to bring home the point. Bombadil has saved the hobbits from the tree Old Man Willow and brought them into his house, fed them, clothed them, gave them a lovely, cozy place to stay for a few days. And in the evening after dinner, he starts singing and telling them tales, tales of many different kinds of things. And we'll pick it up there. He told them tales of bees and flowers, the ways of trees and the strange creatures of the forest, about the evil things and good things, things friendly and things unfriendly, cruel things and kind things, and secrets hidden under brambles. As they listened, the hobbits began to understand the lives of the forest, apart from themselves, indeed to feel themselves as the strangers where all other things were at home. Moving constantly in and out of his talk was Old Man Willow, and Frodo learned now enough to content him. Indeed, more than enough, for it was not comfortable lore. Tom's words laid bare the hearts of trees and their thoughts, which were often dark and strange, and filled with a hatred of things that go free upon the earth, gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, burning, destroyers and usurpers. It was not called the Old Forest without reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of the vast forgotten woods, and in it there lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. The countless years had filled them with pride and rooted wisdom, and with malice. But none were more dangerous than the great willow. His heart was rotten, but his strength was green, and he was cunning, and a master of winds, and his song and thought ran through the woods on both sides of the river. His grey, thirsty spirit drew power out of the earth and spread like fine root threads in the ground and invisible twig fingers in the air, till it had under its dominion nearly all the trees of the forest, from the hedge of the downs. I think Tolkien actually put it best, how Tom is approaching his subject matter in the stories. He did it in a couple of his letters, numbered 144 and 153. And there's an excerpt from 153 that I want to read, because I think it is quite striking, actually. It's not something you would expect Tolkien to say here. But he's commenting on the significance of Bombadil within the story. What role does he play? Is he an allegory for something, and so on? Bombadil is then an allegory or an exemplar, a particular embodying of pure (real) natural science, the spirit that desires knowledge of other things, their history and nature, because they are other and wholly independent of the inquiring mind, a spirit coeval with the rational mind, and entirely unconcerned with doing anything with the knowledge. Zoology and botany, not cattle breeding or agriculture. This is quite a striking passage. Bombadil has the aesthetic attitude in many ways. He's engaging with the creatures of the old forest, not in terms of how they benefit him or how they impact his well-being, how he can exert his will upon them or through them. Rather, he wants to just understand them. He wants to see them, explore them, have a knowledge of them and appreciate them in all of their qualities. In the passage we just heard, he goes into depth about the the mean heart of Old Man Willow. He's not just telling the hobbits nice, comfortable stories with lovely creatures like squirrels and butterflies and so on, though they feature. He's also revealing to them the dark parts of nature, the horrifying aspects of it, the threats. He's in essence, he's appreciating the full character of the world around him without qualm and without seeking to control it. He is a very unique individual in that aspect, and very few people could attain such an attitude. But that is the pure form of the aesthetic attitude. And it fundamentally relies upon this epistemological recognition of the independent being of the world around us, of the creatures around us. When we treat them from a utility point of view, we I've got to be careful with my language here. We implicitly deny their independence from us, from our will. But when we recognize their independence through this aesthetic attitude, we can appreciate them more fully. I think maybe a really good illustration of this, and we can draw a little bit up from Heidegger here, is this distinction he has between ready at hand and present at hand. It's not quite the same, but I think it will do the trick. Ready at hand is how we treat most objects in the world, and we do so according to their function. So when I pick up a hammer, I don't think about it. I tacitly know that the hammer's purpose is to hammer in the nail. And so I pick it up, I use it for that purpose. It becomes an extension of my will, the means by which I achieve my goal of hammer or getting this nail into the furniture. And then I put it away. Present at hand is when we recognize an object independent of its function. And we do so for Heidegger because perhaps the object is faulty. And so we start to consider it from a perspective beyond its, making our goals be fulfilled. We treat it, we give it a due attention, I guess. We can perhaps see this right now in a way. You're probably watching or listening to this using a computer or phone. You may have headphones. You may not have really thought about the equipment that you were using to engage with this, the way it looks, the way it feels, the setting in which it's in. Just put your finger on the side of your device, for example. That texture is different from, let's say, if you have a book next to you. It's a very different texture. You don't tend to think about a book or a computer in relation to its texture, but that is a part of its being. That is when we come to start considering objects in that way, or other beings in that way, we're engaging in an aesthetic relationship rather than one of utility. And this, of course, has much deeper implications when we get into social relationships, when we're relating to other people. I think there can be a tendency to treat others in a similar way. It's about, are they doing what I like? Do I dislike what they're doing? How can I bring them round to what I want them to do? Again, extensions of my will, rather than really engaging with them as wholly independent from me beings. Wagner and Tolkien's politics are reflective of this idea, at least within their stories. Wagner was Well, there's been a lot of different ways of characterizing his political points of view, but I think at the time of Das Rheingold, he's definitely an anarchist, influenced by Bakunin and Feuerbach in various ways. We see this with the way he sets out the story, that it begins with a kind of state of natural bliss, where no creature seems to have elevation over another. But this is disrupted by Alberich and Wotan, who, through the desire for power, elevate themselves and, in so doing, enslave others. And the deliverance from this situation, well, in the third opera, Siegfried, the great hero, overthrows Wotan, and with Brunhilde, there's this kind of sense of ushering in a new age, an age of humanity. So very Feuerbachian, overthrowing the gods, the old morality, the external morality, and there'll be an age based on love, not coercion. This is disrupted, of course, in the fourth opera, but let's not go into that in a moment. So there is this very, I guess it's kind of Rousseauian, this harmonious state of nature, which has been disrupted by the introduction of hierarchy, which is motivated by a will to power. Tolkien has some similar emphases in some ways. So when we look at a character like Tom Bombadil, he is a very powerful being, but he is not a ruler. Is made quite explicit within the text when Frodo asks, "Oh, does the old forest and this country belong to Tom Bombadil?" His wife Goldberry is kind of embarrassed by the question. She's quite adamant that no, he is not a ruler. That would be a terrible burden. All the creatures of the forest are free. It's a completely anarchic realm, even though it is overseen by Bombadil. It's but Bombadil is a unique character. He has perhaps this scientific or aesthetic attitude to its extreme. So he's able to do that. And of course, because he's so powerful, when other creatures try to harm him, it has no effect. Somewhere where, the everyman might live is the Shire. And that is a mix of an aristocratic and anarchic society. There are the Thane, the old Took, certain families which have noble lineage and so on. But if we're talking about government, there isn't really a government of the Shire. There is a security force in the sheriffs who are very, there's not many of them. But beyond that, there isn't kind of a body that's implementing political reform into the Shire. By and large, it's families who are self-sustaining and trading at the markets and so on. Now, this is a very high trust society. The inhabitants are, by and large, of a decent moral nature. They might not be all noble, but they stick by the community conventions. No hobbit has ever killed another hobbit, for example, in the history of the Shire. Within the Shire, I should say. So this is a very unique circumstance as well. But Tolkien's giving us an insight into, well, perhaps what England was like to some extent in the medieval era, but also his own view that actually the control or political authority is a necessary evil. It's not something which is the ideal, because all of us are independent beings. We are not mere extensions of another's will. And so the best state would be for us to all be free and with our responsibility in community, living as autonomous agents. But of course, there is also a strong monarchical aspect in Tolkien too, that the rightful authority, if we are to have hierarchy, is a divinely ordained king. such as Aragorn. So so he's not a total anarchist. He's not like Wagner, who's a quite utopian, at least at the beginning of the Ring cycle. At the beginning of when he wrote the Ring cycle, Tolkien recognizes the fallenness of human beings and creatures more generally, but he's sympathetic with it. Indeed, he pushes this further. There are numerous creatures in Middle-earth, numerous characters who deserve death and who are threats, who are evil creatures. We've already commented on Old Man Willow, a tree who, with his dark heart, tries to consume the hobbits. He's not a good presence within the Old Forest. Gollum tries to kill Frodo and Sam to reclaim the ring for himself. Grima Wormtongue, working for the evil wizard Saruman, poisons the mind of King Theoden, giving him advice which is to the detriment of the people of Rohan. He's a traitor. What's more, he has knowledge of, a deep knowledge of the Rohirrim and what the king might do. So he is a threat to the people of Rohan. And he is guilty of many crimes. But in each case, each is given or shown mercy by the protagonists. Tom Bombadil does not take an axe to Old Man Willow. Frodo, rather than killing Gollum, gives him the chance to lead the hobbits to Mordor. King Theoden does not execute Wormtongue, but gives him the opportunity to choose which side he is on. He can stay and fight with the Rohirrim. He can go elsewhere if he so desires. Indeed, he can even go to the wizard Saruman, even though that would be harmful to the Rohirrim. Now, why is this? Well, at one level, it's because of Tolkien's idea, and it's expressed by Gandalf in discussion with Frodo, that it's important not to kill needlessly. If another being is no longer an existential threat, then it is not right to execute them, even if they deserve. Well, sorry, that's not quite right. Let me rephrase. If another being is no longer an existential threat, although they might deserve to die, the better thing to do is to spare them. Now, one of the reasons is they then have the opportunity of redemption, and that is what is offered to Gollum and to Grima Wormtongue. Particularly Wormtongue, he is given the chance to choose to fight for Rohan. He's given the chance to choose his next course. But in a way, he will be condemned or judged according to his next action. Yes, you've done many wrong things, but you have a chance to set things right. You have a chance to define who you are and what side you truly are on. Because maybe you were under duress. Maybe you were forced into this. Maybe you will regret it. But the other side of it is this conviction of Tolkien's that these are not just obstacles to us. These are not just beings who are there to fulfill our will, and if they don't, that are to be destroyed. They have an integrity of their own. And even if they are doing things which we do not like, even if they are doing things which may cause us mischief or harm, they should not be, their existence has value. And so we should not kill them lightly, unless they are an existential threat. And this has its roots in Tolkien's metaphysics, because just as Wagner's view of the original state of nature informs his anarchism, so Tolkien's Catholic faith is very much in play here. And it's reflected in the Silmarillion. We need not go into that today, but the point is that if the Christian God exists, then this God who is good, who has the right to judge us all and to send us all into hell, he permits the existence of beings who choose to do evil. He does not just wipe them out. Why? Because he values their existence. Now, we might not understand why that is exactly, but there is an integrity to that, okay, you are an independent being, you have a mind, you have a will, you are able to choose between good and evil. You have chosen evil, but you're not going to frustrate my plans. You're not going to derail the course of history. So is there value in still allowing you to exist? The divine seems to think so. And so this is reflected in the moral universe of the Lord of the Rings. Okay, so I think then there's a number of kind of broader applications I want to bring out here. So we're kind of moving away from Wagner and Tolkien and into perhaps some interesting questions and ways in which this might apply to us more generally. But there is one Tolkien point I should bring out first before we do that. The passage we read with Tom Bombadil. It's interesting that this idea that we are learning to see things apart from ourselves and having a life of their own, with their own desires and wishes, that they're not reducible to how they relate to my desires and wishes, that this comes through Tom telling stories and tales. And Tolkien is making a point about fantasy storytelling more generally. He writes about this in his lecture and then essay on fairy stories in the theme of recovery. That what is the point of a fantasy story? Well, one of its functions is to help us to gain this aesthetic attitude towards the world. We have a tendency to take things, make them our own, use them for certain purposes, and then lose our sense of wonder with them. We forget that they are distinct from ourselves and just treat them in terms of their utility. But the fairy story or the fantasy story reawakens that acquaintance with the otherness of the other. It does so by presenting it in a striking way or in a new way. And so we come to appreciate it again. This perhaps can be most clearly demonstrated through Tolkien's engagement with trees. Throughout The Lord of the Rings, we come into contact with trees in quite a special and unique way, in a way that I think is quite distinctive to Tolkien. Trees are not just how they are in our universe, they are agents. They have will. They can engage and act upon you. Old Man Willow isn't just a static object. He attacks Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. We discover his character has a history going back thousands of years, which has led him to have this vengeful characteristic, and that he wants to wreak havoc upon all beings which walk upon 2 feet. He's malicious, but because of the wrongs done to trees. We later meet the Ents. These are the shepherds of the trees. They look like trees, and not only do they have agency, but they can speak. What this does is it presents to us something important about trees, that they are living beings, that they have their own, would desires be the right word? I don't know, but there's an instinctual aspect to a tree. It has its own life cycle, independent of our own lives. Like the trees, and they've been here a lot longer, going through those life cycles. It does so by giving them the qualities of persons, and in so doing, making us recognize that fact in a new way. For Tolkien, dragons, goblins, and so on, they're all ways of doing this, of representing the ordinary in an extraordinary way, so that we see them for what they are once more. And it's interesting in this regard that the stories that Tolkien writes, but particularly the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, they begin in the house and they end in the comfortable Shire. It's a criticism made by Michael Moorcock, um, the author of the Elrich series and other fantasy works, that Tolkien's stories don't move beyond the home. In a way, everything returns to how it was before. There's an avoidance of the necessary change upon us made by struggle and suffering. Indeed, he goes so far to say that Tolkien really can't handle the reality of death. And this is reflected in the fact that we all return home happy and cozy. Now, there's a lot that could be said to this, and it might merit its own treatment one day. But I think it somewhat misses what Tolkien thinks is important, which is that fantasy isn't purely an escape from our current world, nor is it meant to remove us from ordinary life. It's not to make us go out on an adventure, although that might be something we ought to do. Part of its function in terms of recovery is to help us see the home, the ordinary, the mundane, as actually a location of the magical, of the extraordinary, of a site of wonder. And it does that by making us see that all the things around us are not ourselves, that they are not reducible to who we are and what we want and so on. That there is a real difference between us, and thus we can start appreciating those things around us for their qualities. That could be on a sensory level. So appreciating the texture of this book, really engaging with it as another being. Or it might be truly appreciating, acknowledging the good and bad in the people around us, truly listening to what they're saying, what they desire, and so on. This is an idea taken up by Tolkien through the influence of George MacDonald, who set perhaps his most famous work, The Princess and the Goblin. It really has its setting in a house, but the house has all these magical components and so on. I think this is a really important point, and it when taken on board, and when you allow the fantasy to shape you in that way, maybe it's not even a question of allow. When the fantasy shapes you in that way, it's going to start working in you another attitude to the things in your life, even if you're not going off on a great adventure. And you're going to be a greater person for that. I think then let's move on to the general kind of points. And I'll say as well, please feel free to put questions, comments in the chat. I will try and address some of them towards the end of the stream. Super chats obviously will be given priority. So please feel free to do that, and I will get to them in due course. But some kind of interesting questions or issues here. The first is really the relationship between, uh, what would you say, art and entertainment, or art and pleasure. There is this trend on Twitter of posting paintings. I am one of person who does such things, and one of the kind of aspects that I've been thinking about with it is what is the purpose of posting such paintings, and what are people looking for when you post um, a work of art? One of the things I've noticed is centered around the paintings posted by John D, who's a friend of the show. He's been on once, I think, to discuss the purpose of art, and a number of times he's posted paintings which have drawn a negative response from many people online. These will be some kind of 20th century work, maybe a Mondrian, or a work which um, the critic will say, I could draw that, or a 12-year-old could draw that, something to that effect. And of course, Mr. D will block them. Other times, he might post something which is um, seems ugly, let's say, or isn't tasteful. And people don't like that either. What people do want might be something like this. Let's see. Here we go. So this is a painting by Arthur Hughes, a Victorian painter, and it's called Ophelia. And it's a very pleasant painting. I've posted it myself. She's a very attractive, gorgeous woman in the painting with this longing look, somewhat wishing for you to love her or for Hamlet to love her. It's it's uh, it's a nice painting. It evokes nice emotions. But is that really the aesthetic attitude? Because what's often being happening here is people are judging paintings according to what they like, or whether it arouses pleasure in them. In essence, they're judging it according to the way they want to use the art. If they don't like it, they have a negative reaction, they dismiss it. This might be then the source of what some have called kitsch. And I'm never quite too clear on where the boundaries lie with kitsch and good art. But I think there's something to it of you're making something which is its primary value is it's likable, that it's going to make people feel good. But if we contrast that with something like this by Francis Bacon, the 20th century artist, okay, so I wouldn't say this is a likable painting or set of paintings. It's not particularly pleasant to look at, especially when it's connected to the crucifixion. It's three monstrous, hideous creatures. One of them almost wailing at the end, another in the middle looking somewhat irked, maybe hungry in some way. It's very ugly, these creatures. But if we're looking at it from an aesthetic attitude rather than how it serves our ego or will, then it becomes something that you can appreciate, something that might ask questions of you, the viewer. Why do you feel a certain set of responses to this? What's it saying about the crucifixion? How does it, convey something about the world we live in today? I think these sets of paintings are probably going to stimulate you in quite powerful ways and in much richer ways than your Ophelia by Arthur Hughes. But it's about the perspective that you're engaging it in. And the same could be said of other kind of arts. I think, for example, with music today, a lot of the time, people engage with music as something they put on in the background. You put your headphones on, you put your playlist on, and you go and do other activities. Maybe you go for a jog. Maybe you're working. Maybe you're tidying the house or something like that. And the primary purpose of such music isn't the value of the music itself. It isn't the act of listening to the music. It's to make the person feel good or to intensify how you know, they're feeling at that moment in some way. I think it's by contrast, the kind of aesthetic approach to music would be to not have anything else going on and giving your full attention to the piece that you're listening to. And this is particularly the case with something like classical music or a Wagnerian opera, because then you can really follow the melodies. You can listen to all of the harmonies and dissonances and really appreciate the work in its fullness. You can allow it to arouse in you a number of different emotions. And oftentimes, the true worth of these great pieces can only be discovered when you seek to pay attention to it in a very concentrated way. You pick up things that just having it on in the background you never would. Little details that the composer put in that elevate the work far beyond what you could have ever expected. I find this often with listening to Beethoven, that listening to the melody, my mind expects a certain direction to be taken because of the chordal sequence that's being used, and then he takes another way. But then it's in such a way that it's better than anything I thought could happen, but he still arrives at the right point. Truly magical. But I wouldn't get that if I was just putting it on in the background. Perhaps the mode of art, if it is art, that's most guilty of this is cinema. I think a lot of cinema is created just for feels, to have tension, anxiousness, and then release. Excitement, essentially. And that there may be a place for that. But then there is other kinds of film. I would say something like Apocalypse Now, which really isn't that exciting. Not it's very slow. Not a lot's really happening most of the time. It's more about building an atmosphere and exploring certain ideas. If I'm going in looking just to feel good, to have pleasure in response to the film, I'm not going to really appreciate it. But if I go in just giving it my full attention, allowing it to really unfold itself, then I'm going to get the value of this work and see why it is regarded as such a great film. The flip side of this point, though, is that the danger is that we start to see, well, there's a sharp division between art and entertainment. But some of the great works of art are thoroughly entertaining. I think of somebody like William Shakespeare, whose plays are a great exploration of human nature and its, human relationships and the things which affect many of us in there. But they're highly entertaining, especially for a Tudor audience. Some of those plays, there are numerous lewd jokes in the middle. I think of something like Romeo and Juliet. a very serious theme, with quite one of the most memorable tragedies in the last 500 years or so. But it's thoroughly entertaining. It's funny. So it's I think there's a difficult balance there to be drawn between developing something which is a great work of art and encourages or demands the aesthetic attitude, but also can incorporate into that something which is enjoyable. Maybe these are very two different modes of creation. Maybe they do not cross over, but I think there must be a place for it. In part because if great art is the engaging in with the real, with independent beings and trying to represent that or reflect that or express that, then it's also going to express the enjoyable, the exciting as part of that, because that is part of our experience. That is part of relating to the other. I just threw that out there. I okay, let's see. We're kind of getting on a bit. So yes, I'm going to address maybe uh, two two or three other points here. So one of them is connected with a video I had wanted to make a long time ago. I did a lot of recording for it. I planned it out, but I never did it because I thought, oh, this is going to be to get clarity on this issue is going to be difficult. And I still am wrestling with it. But I think it now is the time to kind of broach the subject. It is Skyrim. Now, this might seem like a strange place to go. The video game which many of us have played, poured hundreds of hours into. It doesn't seem immediately relevant to a discussion of the other, but I think it is a quintessential expression of a mode of engagement or activity which facilitates the primary narcissism of a creature like Alberich. Let me explain why. And we'll focus at first with the character of Belethor. Belethor is an NPC, a non-playable character that you meet in Whiterun, the first town or major town that you will come into. And he is the owner of the general goods store, the place that you're going to get many of your resources. You, as the player, are going to primarily interact with him because you're going to need things as you go out and complete missions. You're going to need health potions, food, armor, etc., etc. And Belethor can offer you a lot of these things for a price. Beyond that function, Belethor has very little purpose within the game. I spent several nights following him around Whiterun to see what he would do. And all he does is walk around the town and then go to sleep. He has very little dialogue, and once you've exhausted his about 3 lines, there's nothing more to it. And so this character only exists as a kind of vending machine. He exists for your benefit. He you could just replace him with you know, a pad, a computer pad, and type in what you want, and if you have the money, get it out. So a vending machine. He's not an independent being. And this made me realize that none of the beings in Skyrim are truly independent. They all exist for you, the player. They all exist for your benefit. Some of them are like Belethor, who provide resources. Others are obstacles that you are to overcome. And indeed, when you overcome them, well, why do you want to overcome them? Sometimes it's because there's a mission to complete, but other times it's just because you want what they've got. You're actively rewarded by killing a bandit, for example, who ostensibly is another being within this world, with maybe a sword or some money and so on. He doesn't truly exist as a real being, this bandit that you've attacked, or who is attacking you. He is just a resource to be kind of slain for his goods. In essence, the whole world exists to become an extension of your desires and will. And this can be taken to its extreme when you just go around slaying, slaying a village or whatever because you want to do it. That's what they're there for. If you want to do that, it doesn't matter, because there's no sense that they have lives that if you didn't exist, if you weren't playing, they would be living. They're not truly persons. Now that might be obvious, but the key point I think here is that you're playing a game which is meant to simulate, in some sense, a real world. That, okay, it's not our world, but it is a perspective upon you're entering a subjective perspective within a internally consistent world, and are supposed to engage with that world as if you were a real person within that world. So you're supposed to engage with it as if it was a real world, but the way that you engage with it is exploitative. There was this book written a few years ago by a number of academics, progressive academics, analyzing Skyrim. I read it, so you guys don't have to. It was a tough slog, but one of the articles I thought made a good point on this, that fundamentally Skyrim sees the world in purely quantitative terms. Your rewards for great achievements for slaying a dragon, let's say, isn't the building of virtue, because that would be something. How do you translate that into a game? No, it's more resources, more treasure. You kill a bandit, you get treasure. You achieve something, you get more points on your leveling up scores, which allows you to get more treasure and so on. It's a capitalist view, she would say, but I would go further. It's quantitative. And so this perspective that you're playing with, you're simulating and treating other beings like that, even though those in the game are not independent realities. So when you come out of the game, though, it's because you're pretending that there are other realities. I think it's likely to shape how you engage with truly independent beings, because you will treat them the same or similarly as you will those in Skyrim. No, I'm not saying that you're going to go around robbing people and so on, but I think there is a sense in which these games influence our modes of seeing other things and thus our ways of behaving. I don't think all games are like that. I think some games do give you more of a sense of an NPC's independence from you. I think in some aspects, Dark Souls games have that ability, and that's because your decisions can actively alter how characters engage with you, what options are open to you, and so on. That there is all this history and lore that isn't just fed to you, that you have to go and discover for yourself about the world. and completely optional things that you don't need to do to complete the game gives this sense of this. There are things other than myself, other than my story going on here. But it's a difficult thing to achieve. And when fundamentally even those characters exist for your entertainment or your experience, it can be hard not to fall into this solipsistic primary narcissism. I throw that out there. I might still do that video at one point on Skyrim and a more focused analysis. But I think there's something there to consider in how it's shaping how we see things. So two final or final points here, and these are maybe more deeper issues than how Skyrim shapes the way we see the world. I think what Wagner and Tolkien are addressing are important points, and there is something to be said for the aesthetic attitude. But I want to return to something which Wotan says within the actually within Siegfried, so the third opera, and he's been asked to define who is the king of the gods, or who is the rules over the world, and he says the following. Find the right page. On cloud-covered heights, there dwell the gods. Valhalla is their hall. Light elves they are. Light Alberich, Wotan, rules their host. From the world's ash holiest bough he made himself a shaft. Though the trunk may wither, the spear shall never fail. With the point of that weapon, Wotan governs the world. Hallowed treaties, binding runes, he whittled into its staff. He who wields the spear that Wotan's fist still spans holds within his hand control over all the world. Before him bowed the Nibelung's host. The brood of giants was tamed by his counsel. Forever they all obey the mighty lord of the spear. Now, did you notice at the beginning of that passage that Wotan called himself something really interesting? Light Alberich. Light Alberich. Now, throughout the operas, Alberich, the dwarf who forged the ring, has been a malevolent creature. He is the antithesis of what Wagner stands for. He tries to exploit the Rheingold and enslave both the Nibelungs and the gods. But more than that, he's driven by petty resentment. He hates the Rhine maidens for rejecting him. He hates the gods for their beauty and their love. And he wants to drag them down into his misery and bring them to a place of hatred, essentially. Wotan isn't like that. He has his flaws for sure, but he's not resentful. He's not driven by revenge. So this comparison isn't that Wotan isn't saying, "Oh, I am identical to Alberich." No, whereas Alberich is called Dark Alberich by Wotan, he calls himself Light Alberich. He is a noble being. He is a statesman who is, rather than petty and vengeful, wants to oversee and govern the world. But there is a point of similarity. They both desire power. They both have the will to impose themselves upon reality, to see themselves at the top of the hierarchy. Alberich may be the the lower version, and the Nietzsche's kind of ideas about the lower class being resentful of the nobles could be seen in this dynamic of Wotan and Alberich here. But I think it's and so there is that distinction, but ultimately they're driven by the same impulse. And the suggestion then that Wotan is also shares this with Alberich maybe gives us pause for thought about whether it's presented as a wholly evil thing. Sure, it disrupts the kind of mythical peace of nature, but Wotan's will to rule allows for the achievement of things which would not have been possible without uh, this desire. For example, the building of Valhalla, the fortress of the gods, this magnificent palace. This is brought to be because Wotan wants a stronghold from which he can rule the world, from which he is secure from any threat. Moreover, in in human history, we've seen that it is this drive to bring our will upon the world, which has achieved the civilizing or taming of the wild places. In England, that was the cutting back of the forests, the places of bandits and bears, and establishing towns and gardens, safe and secure places where people can thrive and flourish. In America, it was the rolling back of the frontier, overcoming those hostile environments and managing to build a life in these remote parts of the world. And if we go even further back, perhaps to the Neolithic era that we were discussing in a previous stream, the shift from being a hunter-gatherer to agricultural farmers and nomadic pastoral peoples, this was, we're not just going to be part of nature, in tune with the normal cycles of hunting and fishing and so on. We're not just going to be another predator in the chain. We're going to shape the world to benefit us. And what did that achieve? Well, as we discussed last time, the agricultural revolution, the efficient production of food, meant that less people needed to give their time over to food production, allowing for the development of culture, of the arts, of religion, and so on. In other words, this desire for power, or to remold the world according to our desires, to use things for our benefit, has enormous creative potential. Not all of those things are good. We can debate whether industrialization was a good thing. Somebody like Ted Kaczynski would say it was detrimental to us because it robbed many of us of that participation in those activities essential for life. And in so doing, thus robbed us of true meaning and dignity and so on. Others will say, well, it elevated our material wealth, but more than that, it has allowed for the production of great art. It has allowed for the conquest of space, etc., etc. The point is, though, is that the aesthetic attitude doesn't give you this sort of exploration and conquest of space. It doesn't give you the Faustian individual, as Spengler would characterize it. It doesn't give you that impulse to explore and dominate. It's maybe a part of it, so the appreciation of the other. So something like Star Trek, the original Star Treks, where Captain Kirk and Spock on the ship, their mission is to explore the galaxy, to go into the unknown and appreciate it, not to control it, but to appreciate it. That's very aesthetic attitude. But to build, to develop something, to push back the wilderness and create a garden, to slay the dragon, that requires something more or something else. So I think that's a tension there, and I'm not sure how to resolve it. I think both aspects are important. Both are needed. Indeed, the creation of art itself needs both, I think. There's a substantial element of the artist wanting to not just appreciate beautiful things in life that they've encountered, not just to appreciate aspects of it, but to actually change the world through the creation of art. It's not just a mirror of something else. It actually is meant to impact the present moment, to alter it and have a decisive effect upon those who engage with it. It's not just something pretty to be put on the wall. It's it marks a new stage or a change in the fabric of reality. That requires more than this aesthetic attitude or this neutral scientific approach. It's a statement. So I think that's maybe a pause for thought with these two authors. And indeed, if I was going to maybe suggest something about Tolkien in this regard, it would be this: that his conception of uh, kind of heroism is always from a rearguard position. He's drawing upon Saxon mythology and storytelling in in this um, because he when he looks at he was an expert in Old English poetry, and he saw in it a worldview where you have these great halls, which are places of safety and sanctuary, and a hostile world without. That within the halls you have the warriors drinking and celebrating, telling tales, maybe wrestling with each other, and so on. But outside are monsters like Grendel or the dragon, and they want to devour humanity. They are a threat to all men, regardless of which faction they are a part of. And so, men, in alliance with the Christian God, or in Norse mythology, the gods, are in a perpetual conflict with this force which is pushing in on us and will eventually win. This is the world of Middle Earth. It is embattled heroes fighting to the last against what seem like unstoppable foes, only to be delivered and rescued in the nick of time by unexpected help. This dynamic is very compelling and does speak to something deep, I think, within the Anglo-Saxon heart. It has no conception of, or no place for the hero that goes forth and establishes a new order. There is no hero which thinks, okay, we've defeated Sauron, I'm now going to remake Mordor. There is no character who sets off for a new land, um, in the Lord of the Rings at least, and seeks to push back the wilderness. It's it's a very kind of defensive worldview. We fight when we have to defend. We don't go on the attack. We don't go forth and break through the walls, as it were. I'm unsure whether this is uh, whether this criticism or this point is, is it valid. I don't know. I think I'm not trying to devalue Tolkien, as you know I love Tolkien, but I think there is a genuine question or point there that is worthy of consideration, and is perhaps why Tolkien's view of heroism, of morality, and so on, um, it somewhat shies away from perhaps a necessary set of questions about masculinity, about conflict, and about what we should do or how we deal with the current moment. Um, that might be something people want to discuss in the comments or in the chat. It's something that I think it's also related to the fact that a lot of fantasy today, since Michael Moorcock actually, has departed from a kind of Tolkien approach to fantasy. There is much more engagement with this question. That's not to say any of it is as good as Tolkien's work. I don't think it is. I think he achieved something unique and remarkable within 20th century writing. It's but they do wrestle with the question more than he does of that kind of hero who isn't just fighting a rearguard action or defending, but actually is going forth and establishing something new. The irony is here, of course, is I think somebody like Wagner, in the character of Siegfried, engages with this question, but it's shied away from. And Nietzsche kind of makes this criticism of Wagner that you have a great man here, Siegfried, who overturns the old order, the hypocritical order of Wotan, which on the one hand relies on contracts, right? But on the other hand, he only fulfills those contracts by robbing Alberich of the ring and giving it in exchange for Freya. It's a lie. This order is a lie. The idea that he's the upholder of moral order is a lie. Siegfried overthrows that and establishes a new world in which humanity, or the great humans like himself, will define it. But Wagner then, in the final act, leads this into tragedy. Siegfried is deceived, he is misled, and essentially betrays Brunhilde. As a consequence, he is murdered, and the promise of this new age is destroyed. Indeed, Wagner's later operas would wholly reject any sort of noble character defining the world in such a way through their will, imposing their will upon the world. But it is there in the work. Perhaps then this leads to the final point. We've just mentioned Nietzsche, and he has this idea that life is a work of art, or at least a great individual should seek to make their life a work of art. Now, I cannot say that I am any expert on Nietzsche or have much knowledge of at least his later writings. I've read The Birth of Tragedy, which is when you read it and you've read Wagner, you can see a lot of Wagner in Nietzsche's early writings. But I think this idea of the aesthetic attitude can at least open our eyes to what that might look like, or how we can engage with this idea of life as a work of art. So often we live our lives thinking only from the perspective of what I want, my desires, how I can achieve them. And this is quite natural because, as Schopenhauer pointed out, we are driven by the will to life. We want to survive. We want to flourish. We want to see our dreams and wishes fulfilled. And we will overcome things which are in our way, or at least we will try. This is the essence of the struggle of life. But in so doing, we see our life only in terms of benefit and harm sometimes. We don't like the parts of suffering, and so therefore we don't see them as valuable. We don't like the periods of pain and struggle, so we don't truly appreciate them. But if we are able to take a step back from ourselves, as it were, to see our lives from the aesthetic point of view, not in terms of how parts of it benefit us, but as something to be valued in its own right, then we can appreciate the whole of our lives, all of its um, beauty and ugliness, its good and bad. We can see it as having a worth, even if the things within it we might wish weren't there. It can become just like Bombadil is able to appreciate the whole of the old forest and wants to engage with it all and understand it all. So we can do that with ourselves and truly see ourselves for what we are. This then also has an effect upon us because then we think, okay, this is what I'm struggling for. Is that worthy of struggle? Perhaps there is something greater to be struggled for. Something that would make a greater work of art of my life. So I think that this aesthetic attitude idea not only should impact how we, from time to time, engage with other things, with other beings, and so on, but it also provides room for reflection upon ourselves and how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to the things in our lives, and thus how we live our lives. So it can really touch us at a deep level. So that is kind of the end of the presentation. As I promised at the beginning, we had a lot bundled together there. We've gone through a lot of different aspects and things, but I think it was worthwhile doing that because it's a. I hope you can see that this idea of the aesthetic attitude it's trying to speak to us. It's addressing something quite fundamental, how we engage with the world, how we see the world, perceive the value of things fundamentally. And one of the great problems today, I think, is that our values are all out of sync. We prioritize some things and we devalue other things. Many people have spoken about this at length. You've got, the cult of happiness. The most important thing in life is being happy. And if anything is in the way of your happiness, you should get rid of it. This is kind of peak individualism. Tied to that is a kind of therapeutic idea of not just health being very valuable, but your mental health. So anything's an impact on your mental health, it should be dispensed of, even if it will make you a better person. So we get rid of struggle, we get rid of those things which cause anxiousness or other things which are medicalized, and we focus on being comfortable and happy. Nietzsche's last men. And that's not to say there aren't genuine mental illnesses, right? There definitely are. I'm just speaking to the values which are then pushed way beyond that category. And there are others as well. There are others as well. Equality. Everything must be equal. Everything must be the same for everybody. Everybody must have the same opportunity. This is a value of today. There is no sense, for example, that we should value virtue as one of the highest goods, that we should value artistic brilliance, intellectual greatness, that the ability to establish a just society is, of high value, because that would be elevating somebody far above, recognizing the elevation of someone above most of us. So this sort of question of aesthetic attitude speaks to these issues, and one of them is seeing things through a pragmatic and utility based approach to the world without any sense of the otherness, the independent existence of things from ourselves, thus robbing us of wonder, robbing us of love, robbing us of a full engagement with reality. Art, fantasy, and so on can help recover that. Various forms of meditation. Indeed, what we did earlier, just paying attention to things for 5 minutes a day, can help work that in to your life. And fundamentally, I think it's one of the key issues of our time. Many of the things we wrestle with can be brought back to this. I'll just give you one example, and then we'll get to comments. Work. John Ruskin in the Victorian era hit the nail on the head. For many people working in big companies, where there is a division of labor, you are reduced to a cog in a machine. You are given no agency of your own. You are to follow the instructions or the design of somebody else, and you are to create objects perfectly and standardized. There is no space for your imagination, no space for your creativity, no space for your agency. It is all just you're essentially the equivalent of a tool or a machine. And indeed, today we see the consequences of that. There is this idea, whether it's feasible or not, that many of us are replaceable by machines in the workforce. That AI and so on will be able to take our roles. Now, this is a natural consequence of having jobs which are machine-like, where we are just extensions of other people's wills, effecting for them what they want done. So this kind of dialectic between exploitative and aesthetic impacts many people on a daily basis in very fundamental ways. And you really can't address that question until you have that value shift, until you see the world differently and you appreciate, okay, these people are not just drones to fulfill my will, to produce this product which will help me make money. These are actual people with lives that matter, and they deserve to be treated in a certain sort of way. So I think you can see that it's something which isn't just relegated perhaps to the world of kind of culture or some airy-fairy moral commitment, or even just to personal relationships. It impacts social relations, politics, economics, and so on. How you kind of see that, how working out, you could probably do a study of various different disciplines and areas to kind of engage with that question. But I think the kind of heart of the stream is just getting that across the two attitudes and maybe some of the tensions therein. So let's look at some of the comments and probably go for another 15-20 minutes here. So if you have any further points or questions or whatever, please get them in now. So let's start with our super chat. £5 from Lukey World. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. No message, just good vibes and best wishes for one of the kindest gents in these circles. Well, that's very kind of you to say. I do very much appreciate your support, and it's a pleasure to have you around. I always like seeing your avatar in the chat. So yeah, thank you, friend. If you have any question, Lucky World, please do put it in the chat. Question or comment about the stream. Given you've you've sent in super chat. I will bump it up uh, to in terms of addressing it. Let's just see. So we've got quite a good number of friends here today, which is great to see. Um, 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 there is some debate here. I'm not quite sure why, between Napoleon and Gollum, like which was worse, who was more bloodthirsty. Um, I think Gollum's quite an interesting character because he defies the normal way in which the ring tempts people. When we look at the story of the Lord of the Rings, most of the characters who are tempted by it are tempted by the allure of power. So Boromir is tempted with the promise, the false promise, that with the ring he'll be able to save Gondor and become a mighty warrior. With Gandalf, it's a similar kind of temptation that he would be able to use the ring to overthrow Sauron. Even Samwise Gamgee, down to earth Sam, who just wants to go home and have a family and develop his garden. Well, he's tempted with the idea that he could overthrow Sauron and turn Mordor into this lovely garden. A wonderful, of all the things to be tempted with, how wonderful is that? What does that say about Sam's character? But Gollum isn't tempted by any of these things, any kind of desire for power, as far as it seems. He's just tempted by desire for the ring itself, that he wants it for his own. He's primarily motivated by greed, let's say. And perhaps the parallels here are with the dwarves and their dragon sickness, or when Thorin and the company get to the Lonely Mountain and reclaim it from Smaug, they are just lusting after the gold and the treasures therein. They just want them for their own sake. They don't even want to spend it. They are like the dragon. The dragon Smaug, he doesn't do anything with the gold. He just sits atop the pile and delights in having it. So this is a theme that you see in Norse mythology too, with the character of Fafnir and the Ring of Andvari, wanting it for its own sake, this desire for it. It's also there in the ring cycle to some extent. But Gollum, yeah, he's as this comment says by Jim H, he's quite content to just have the ring as an end in itself, independent of any ambition for power. Whereas Napoleon, he definitely was motivated by a desire for power and conquest and so on. If he had got the ring, that's how it would have tempted him, I believe. So I think you're right. And RCW is also coming on this. Yeah, I think that's true. He wanted the world to be shaped by him, whereas Gollum isn't really interested in the outside world. As long as he has his ring, he has everything he could ever want. He's. Is this fair? Yeah, I think it's a different kind of evil that's at work there. Obsession, possessiveness, rather than the twisting of the Faustian spirit, which is the desire to dominate. Yeah, it's quite different. Gollum's a weak character as well. You've got to remember that, and physically we see that he's not meant to be some high and noble lord who's fallen. He's like the coward, the low life coward who somehow comes across this great ring, he squanders its potential. He's it's not within his ability or character to be able to utilize it, even for a dark end which is magnificent. Only a few people have that, and I think that's something we often forget. We all might be tempted with dreams of power, but in reality, would many of us use the ring in such a way? Would many of us have the capacity to really make the most of the ring of power? I think a great character like Gandalf would. I think a great man like Napoleon had that ability. I use great not in the kind of moral, supportive sense, but in the sense that he was mighty, that he had a soul larger than most of us, that could barely be contained by his physical form. Rag plays. Some art belongs in a gallery, some belongs over your headboard. Everything in its place. Well, I think there's something in that. We've been discussing what the place of entertainment, for example, a place of the aesthetic. I do think, though, that there is a question about just having things which are likable or make you feel good. When you contrast that with like Tudor art, a lot of the panel paintings of that period, they would be of biblical scenes. They would also maybe be of kind of angels or saints or so on. But often the characters would be looking right at the viewer. And the point of this was almost like a challenge. It was to kind of let them know, oh, we're watching you. You better not be doing anything bad. And we will be judging you as to your moral conduct. So the art that the Tudors and the Stuarts embraced in their homes was often not of a necessarily a likable character. It was could be deeply distressing or anxiety inducing, but that was because they believed it should have an edifying effect. So I think there's that there could be questions about that as well. But I take your point. I think there can be a place for everything. I guess my concern or objection is that most of kind of our lives are just the entertainment, likable side, and our culture has largely expunged the aesthetic side of it. And certainly that can be seen in the artistic world today, which is more driven by, virtue signaling, social engineering, and funding, and so on, from that direction, than it is any kind of aesthetic cultivation. Let's move forward a bit. Oh, cool. I shall look out for that. Thank you, friend. I think this kind of addresses what was being said there by Jay as well. Yeah, and I think somebody like Jonathan Baldwin was probably a very good example of this. I think it's also called stalking. I was stalking Bellathor around Whiterun. I'm surprised no guards intervened. Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to get at. And but there's another on top of that, because you're playing this simulation of a real world. There's the illusion that this is like real life, so they're independent beings. But because functionally they're like a slot machine, the impression, the way you're engaging with the world, becomes one in which you are the de facto center of it, and you experience it as such. So it can become a not it becomes a damaging thing for your moral perspective on things. Some games do the illusion of NPC agency better than others. More complex routines and NPCs that want things from you that you don't necessarily want. The difference between whether the world moves you or you move the world. A great game will have some degree of both. I think that's true. I think that's true, and I think Dark Souls captures that. I still feel that there is a tension in any game with this issue, but some are more able to avoid it than Skyrim does. I also think as well with Skyrim, there's a number of other issues which maybe feed into this. Not least that you can you can save the world and nothing really happens as a consequence. You could defeat Alduin, Destroyer of Worlds, and you're still you're still like fighting bandits. You should be a king or something by that point. It's your actions seem to have no real impact upon the environment other than through using bandits as resources and so on. It's the only way you have agency within the world, is by using other beings. It's kind of weird. Good lines here. Good lines, Arnold the Saxon. Good to see you. Good to see you, Burnsy. I see you there. Let's see. So, Burnsy, you're looking well, my friend. Have you lost some weight? I have. I have been working the past few months. That's why I've not been so active on the channel. I've been working in a supermarket and stocking shelves, which it's been quite and I've enjoyed it. I've spent 10 years or so studying and teaching in universities, sitting behind a desk pretty much every day. Whereas, making a bit of money at the moment and using my whole body and mind. It's quite physical, getting the stuff out quickly and so on. Lots of lifting, squats, and all that. And I've lost about a stone, over a stone, in a month or so. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's good. I'm appreciative of the opportunity at this point in my life, and we'll see what comes next. But it's a good thing right now. Yeah, and I feel a lot better for it. And in January, I am going to build upon this by going to the gym. I've committed to doing this. So yes, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. And also, you don't need to watch them. Read the books; they're great. You should go for that. I think you would enjoy it if you haven't already read them. Jim H. Gollum may be weak in many senses, but ultimately in the end, Tolkien depicts him as having a role in Sauron's defeat after the Fellowship mercifully spare him during their journey. Yes, this is very true. Gollum is the instrument by which the quest is successful. If Frodo had killed him, if he had done what might have been the pragmatic thing to do at that point, taking out a real threat to the quest, it would have failed, because Frodo, taking the ring for himself, wouldn't have destroyed it. He was overcome, his will was defeated, and Gollum wouldn't have attacked him to take the ring for himself and thus not have slipped. So it was by Frodo's mercy towards Gollum, is offering him clemency, which later allowed for the destruction of the ring. So you can see that it's like Frodo's mercy is the presupposition, the foundation for this. And in Tolkien's kind of letters and other writings, he he suggests that this was providentially orchestrated, that this was the plan of the other power, the author of the story, and by that he doesn't mean himself. He means like the cosmic author, Ilúvatar, as he's called in the Ainul and Dale. So the very fabric of reality is governed. The sequence of events is directed according to this principle of showing mercy. Nonetheless, I think where I might qualify what you've said there is Gollum is key to the destruction of the ring, but it's not out of his own volition, or at least let me put it another way. Of course, his agency is involved. He attacks Frodo for the ring, but it's not. He doesn't help destroy the ring on purpose. It's not his intent to do that. And actually, it's Gollum's weakness, his subservience, his enslavement to the ring, which is the means by which it is destroyed. It's because he's enslaved to it that he tries to rescue it from its destruction, but unintentionally leading to its destruction. So I don't think I don't think he's strong in any sense. It's because of his weakness that he is able to help the destruction of the ring. Rag plays. Many open world games have the issue of never having an ending. I always thought that if there is a narrative present, gameplay needs to finish after it concludes. I agree, and again, you'll think I'm going on about Dark Souls a lot because there may be a stream very, very soon on that with a good friend. But the impact of the narrative ending in that is great because you overcome many bosses, you become a mighty warrior, and because you are mighty, because you've conquered the game, you then get to make the decision as to the fate of the world, and then the game ends because the choice has been made, and that was the climax of the story. And so then you feel a real impact. Oh, the world has changed, therefore the game is gone. The game is done. Whereas, yeah, as I mentioned with Skyrim, you can play that game. The world doesn't change in any way, really, with you defeating Alduin. You just carry on as if nothing had happened. I think The Witcher 3 also suffers from this. Okay, there's certain side quests, certain characters might not be there, but fundamentally the world hasn't really changed. And perhaps this is a weakness with games which focus on saving the current age. Both Skyrim and The Witcher 3 are fundamentally their narratives focus on stopping an external threat from destroying the world, or at least changing the world in significant ways. Alduin and the Wild Hunt. So when you defeat that, you've just maintained the status quo. But that leaves a kind of hollow feeling because you've had to expend a lot of effort. You've had to overcome great foes, and there's no real impact from that. It feels like something in you has changed, that your character has a new status in the world, and that the world itself should reflect that difference, at least in a story context. Whereas, at least with Dark Souls, for example, you're not. Even the act of preserving the Age of Fire requires a renewal and a restoration through the linking of the fire. You sacrifice yourself. The age is supposed to have a new flurry of fire. New life is kind of restored, at least for a time. So there is a real impact, even on that decision. Yeah, and it's actually a weakness of a lot of, kind of movies today as well. So something like, The Avengers, the Infinity War was, I'm happy to say, I thought it was a good piece of entertainment. It was, it was particularly good because, there were real consequences and the heroes died, or many of them died. But then Endgame reverses all of that. You're just brought back to where you were at the beginning. All the heroes come back to life. Thanos is defeated, and the world largely stays the same. We've just maintained what was there already, and this, and I think Batman's maybe the guiltiest of this. And Nord Hugo did a great video on Batman in this regard. Batman is a hero which fights against injustice, against corruption. He defends the people of Gotham from characters like the Joker and Bane, but he never demands a change from the people of Gotham. He's like Saint George without the confidence of Saint George to demand repentance from the people who were feeding their children to dragons. He just has to hide in the shadows. Now, maybe Batman isn't able to do that because of the nature of the people of Gotham, but it is this kind of maintenance of the status quo, even if the status quo is bad. Um, so I do think that there is and that's kind of interesting actually, because again, thinking about Moorcock for a moment, and uh, I've been reading a lot of his works lately, as you might might be able to tell. One of his criticisms of Tolkien and fantasy more broadly is that it allows you to have the enjoyment of the heroic without challenging current institutions. Now, I think this is a laughable comment in relation to Tolkien, because anybody who has his worldview is in conflict with the progressive liberal worldview that came to dominate in the 60s when Moorcock was writing and dominates now. Um, Tolkien's views are at odds with our current order. The idea that we should not destroy beings, even if they are a nuisance, even if we don't like them, that's definitely not part of our authoritarian era, the authoritarianism of liberalism. Uh, the idea that there can be great heroes who demand our loyalty, that's not part of our era. Um, the idea that there can be a king appointed by God, does that sound like something which challenges the current ideas? I think so. But nonetheless, I think he's got a point that a lot of these games, a lot of these movies, they give us these experiences of what Carlyle would call hero worship, admiration for strong individuals who can overcome. We can even experience that for ourselves through video games like The Witcher, like Skyrim. But fundamentally, things don't change. The institutions within the game don't change, and thus the kind of implications of the game for our current society do not have an effect. Um, yeah, this has got my mind rolling, because think about it. Like Carlyle's great man of history is somebody who is is absolutely sincere in their devotion to a set of ideas or values, let's say, and they impose that upon the world. We might see somebody like Saint George as being a bit like that. He overcomes the dragon, he slays the dragon, frees the princess, and then establishes in that town Christianity. So he cultivates something better. Or maybe somebody like the Cadburys, George Cadbury. He builds a chocolate empire, and he does so upon Christian values, creating a whole village for his workforce to have wholesome and meaningful lives. and this is essentially the building of his own kingdom, right? So there is this idea that when you have overcome the foe, when you've slain the dragon, you have the right to determine the course. And in some sense, this is the basic principle of might makes right. It's the idea that those who are worthy, might be good or bad, right? I'm not talking in a moral sense, but those who are strong enough can dictate the course of history. They've at least earned the right to that because they have the power to enforce it. The Dragonborn, who slays Alduin, he ought to be that character. He ought to have that mastery over the province of Skyrim. Because who can actually oppose such a character? He could become the king of the emperor, you know? Instead, he's doing fetch quests for shopkeepers. He's robbing little old ladies. He's he's you know, he's doing trivial things which would be far below somebody of that who had that um magnitude of spirit. Of course, this maybe feeds into the problem here of you can have all the skills and the attributes to take down a character like Alduin, but a video game like Skyrim doesn't demand the spirit in the player to do that. So yeah, I think in that regard, then video games like Skyrim negate the status negate the natural implication of the gameplay by allowing it to continue after the narrative is finished, maintaining this how would you put it, maintaining the status quo, the orthodoxy in the game reflects maintaining it in the real world, even if you had somebody of that character. It has no revolutionary implications. Um, that probably deserves its own stream. That idea, because I think it's yeah, there's something to be really said for that. Yeah, thank you, Rag Place. I do. You've made me think some. You've made me think about that, and I'm glad for it. You also say symptom of a child who never wants the story time to end. Yeah, I think that's true. There is uh, there is a kind of subsuming the self in that kind of world. It's because it revolves around you, because you can't let go, you can't deal with resolution very well. Um, and it's tied to it being an identity, isn't it? It's not just a game to play. It's not just a story to read. Um, it becomes a defining characteristic of who you are. And so, if the game finishes, well, then it's not. It can't be a permanent feature of your identity. Whereas if it keeps on going, you can always do new things. You can try new aspects and so on. So I think there's a. I mean, Dave the Distributist was talking about what he calls the meta of things, the kind of implicit or tacit expectations, purposes of things. He broke them down into three. One is the kind of player who seeks an experience, an identity, or to own the thing as a badge of who they are. Another is a player who wants to try things out in the game, experiment, and so on. And a third is the player who wants to beat the game. And a lot of games are driven by the first player, the player who wants the experience, who makes it a core part of who they are. I think that particularly appeals to millennials, who are individualistic, who are maybe one of the first groups who are genuinely rootless, and who are looking to define themselves. And I'm speaking from from a millennial's perspective, who want a heroic narrative to buy into as well. We want to be great. We want to be those who save the world or whatever. Um, you can do whatever you want to do. That was very much the mantra we were taught. You can be whatever you want to be. So something like Skyrim gives that. And looking back at, I've spent hundreds of hours in it after the game is finished. I'm guilty of this. I think I wouldn't play it now. I think it, for the reasons I outlined earlier. I I uh, I have a real uneasiness about it now. But I did play it for all that time. So yeah, wow. This is looking into my own soul. I think we should move on. Burnsy, I began playing Zelda Breath of the Wild a little while ago. You arrive with nothing but rags and are greeted by an Odinic character who shows you kindness and sets you on your path. Yeah, so that's quite like the hero's journey that you often find in fairy tales and so on. It's I've heard good things about Zelda. I've never played it. Maybe I should at some point. Jim H. Elder Scrolls especially feels like Bethesda had a set idea how the overarching story of the setting should go, but in the games they're giving the players a sandbox built to muck around in. Yeah, I mean that's true. But well, let's see what Regplace here says. Self-sabotaging element for narrative-driven games and vice versa. It's very rare that the balancing act can be kept up. I agree with that. I think for the reasons that we've just been saying, if there was no overarching quest to save the world in Skyrim, I think it probably would have benefited the game. If it was just like, oh, you can do all these different quests and things, probably would be a lot better for it. It's that lack of impact when you've conquered the World Eater. It just feels kind of hollow to me after that point. Whereas if that's never on the table, I mean, there's still problems though. Things like the Skyrim Civil War quest. Okay, you can win for one side or the other, Stormcloaks, Imperials. But what all that changes really is who's sitting on the Jarl's throne and the guard uniforms. It doesn't change at a fundamental level any of the ways you relate to things. It doesn't deliver on the quest, whereas I feel like it should have more of an impact within the world and on your experience as a player. Even things like you should be recognized as an Imperial or Stormcloak champion and have certain rights because of that, and so on. You should be made a governor of a city, etc., etc. These would be the kind of natural consequences of these sorts of things. Perhaps it's not just a sandbox. They're trying to attempt so much with a game like Skyrim that it's probably impossible to manage. But if you focused it in, so let's just say the game was like Skyrim Civil War, you could probably do a lot more with that and focus it in. I've not played this game, but Fallout New Vegas, I believe, has much more of that in the game. So you have real impactful decisions through the decisions you make. So I think there's that would be a model, but of course that wasn't Bethesda, as far as I believe, who develop that. Um, I don't know. I'm conflicted on this. I think that there's space for adventure where you just go out and do what do different things. Um, Something like Rust is quite good at that, but there's no narrative element in there. I think if you're going to include narrative, it has to change the world in a fundamental way. That's interesting. So there is some resolution. I think it. I think the issue is if it doesn't translate into gameplay experience, then there's a disconnect between the narrative and the gameplay, and it can be it can be difficult for a player in that regard. Again, I think that's what Dark Souls does so well, is that gameplay and story match in very strongly in various different ways, actually, in some seemingly conflicting ways, so that what you're playing you feel like is wholly integrated. So if these things had happened in the game, that might be, a way of it coming through. That would be quite good. But because you don't get to do that in the game, I think it's. I don't. I think that. I think there's. I think that's the difficulty. It's hard to achieve. It's really hard to achieve, but I think it's possible. I genuinely do think it can be done with a good open world and a narrative. I think there's creative people who could do that. It's just difficult, and I'm kind of saying, I'm focusing on Skyrim. I'm giving it a hard time, in part because I did enjoy the game. I wouldn't get this worked up about something that I didn't enjoy. I didn't spend lots of hours in and have some connection to. So it obviously works something in there, and it's that feeling of, oh, it could have been more. Looking back, it could have been more. It could have been informing my perspective on life in a better way. That is kind of why I'm going in on it, because I think the potential was there for something brilliant. Like what they achieved was brilliant in some ways. The world at that time was fantastic. The kind of exploring a mythical landscape, I love that. I just feel that there's something missing. I've always felt that, and it's just grown in recent years, seeing what that might be. Well, I think that is a good place to finish up. I'll give folks a couple of minutes just to put any final questions or comments in the chat. I hope that you've managed to glean something from this stream. There's a lot. I appreciate it was quite dense, and there was a lot of different kind of elements being brought in. But I hope it's made you think about the aesthetic attitude and both the things that we can gain from maybe trying to incorporate it more into our lives, into our societies, and so on, but also maybe how it needs to be balanced with other aspects like entertainment, like the will to thrive, to struggle, and so on. And as I've alluded to, I'm going to be on a stream in a week or so. It's going to be with A. Waros from the Longhouse. Waros from the Longhouse. It's going to be on the Dark Souls trilogy. We're going to be discussing the philosophy of Dark Souls. It's going to be interesting. We've been discussing this for quite a while. There's so much to talk about. There's deep lore, the gameplay mechanics, the values underpinning it. It seems to incorporate lots of different ideas and perspectives, sometimes conflicting perspectives, uh, which is part of what makes it such an engaging game. As part of my preparation, I've been reading a couple of things. So I've um, I've been reading the Berserk manga series, which was a key influence both in terms of the philosophy and of the aesthetics of Dark Souls. And it's quite interesting. You find it all online. It's uh, it's pretty brutal and gory, and some horrific scenes in it. But I can definitely see how it influenced uh, the games. And then I've also been reading Michael Moorcock, his Elric series, because that was a key influence on Berserk. But I also think reading it that it's been a direct influence on Dark Souls in ways that have been missed by most people. Primarily because the game uh, producers have never mentioned Moorcock, but I think there's some very obvious connections. For example, I'll give you one example, a teaser. A teaser. Um, Elric wields a sword, a great black sword, which, when it wounds or kills, it devours the soul. It consumes the soul of the victim. In Dark Souls, you play a character who goes around, who, when they kill an enemy, consumes their soul or takes on their soul. Given the Elric series is one of the most influential in modern fantasy, I find it hard to believe that that is a coincidence. Um, Also, given the other connections within the story, there are many more. So yeah, we're going to be doing that. I'm really looking forward to it. It's yeah, it should be really good. And otherwise, we shall see when it might be in the new year that we're next on here. So it's yeah. I hope if I don't see you before then, uh, I hope that you have a wonderful Christmas, that you have a very happy New Year, and yes, that whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you for watching, and good night. Bye for now, folks.